G'day and welcome back to PanzerGarage. The last vehicle we looked at was a Stug 3G with the waffle zimmerit and the side skirts. You'll see that on the website. Not too long before that though, well about a year ago, I did a review on this kit, the Finnish Army Stug 3. So if you want to go back and you need to have a look at that, please do. That'll go into some more detail which we won't cover in this. This is more about the build and some other issues that have sort of come up. So I've decided to go back to this and finish this off. It's been a work in progress. So here is where we are at the moment, but I just want to talk through a couple of things that have sort of come up going through the build so far. It's a Tamiya kit, obviously. Now we're going to get into it, and we're going to show a progressive build over a couple of videos. As you know though, with a lot of my builds, I try to look at a model and find a real vehicle to associate with that if I can. I don't all the time, but if I can find a real vehicle to show that it existed, then I will try and build it that way. You would have seen my BMW motorcycle kit, that was done that way. Whitman's first Tiger was kind of done that way, in terms of theory anyway. But I was doing some research on this vehicle and the marking options that it gives you in the instructions. And in some ways I'm a little bit disappointed by the instructions by Tamiya, because with not too much more effort they could have made a really good couple of options for people to build. The lack of detail in the history within the notes is a little bit not in depth enough or misleading a little. So look, there's a really good couple of sites you can do. I've put the links in the notes to this video. There's a guy in Finland that's done a lot of work on this, and his website is excellent if you're doing any type of finish work. And I would encourage you to have a look at that. So I've pretty much taken a lot of his information from it. My options. Now, the kit sort of comes with the Miata as the 53119 as the prime option in there. You can find real photos of the Miata after the war, with the concrete removed and the logs removed. But it's hard to find a real photo of it during the war with the concrete on there. I'm going to go through some of the history of the vehicle because on how it ended up in Finland, because it's important that you take that into consideration when you're building a vehicle, because there's a couple of variant issues that will come up in that. So I need to go through a little bit of history of this, and as you will note from some of my previous videos, I do tend to go into a little bit of history on this. In terms of the Stumi, which is what the Finns called this, 59 were obtained from 1943, from the fall of 1943 to the beginning of 1944 in two batches. The first batch was 30 vehicles and the second batch was 29 vehicles at the beginning of 44. So it was the G type, the long barrel type for both. And it was really only the first batch of 30 that saw any type of fighting against the Soviets. So if you want to build a diorama or build a vehicle that was demonstrated to fight, you really need to concentrate on the first batch. And that first batch has got the square turrets as opposed to the Sauerkraft mantlet of the vehicle. The first batch collectively killed 87 Soviet tanks in the first few weeks of the battle, for only 8 losses of their own. Logs were often used on the side and concrete on the casement for extra protection. We have some logs here that they're all undercoated at the moment, which we'll be doing later. importantly, depending on the level of depth that you want to go into, on arrival these vehicles were all painted in dark German yellow and with German markings on them. So technically speaking, if you wanted to do a vehicle that shows chipping and markings, you're going to have the iron oxide colour on there at some point, but you would also have a dark yellow under there as well, because the green would have gone over the top. Now the base colour of the finished vehicles are green, and so technically speaking you would do a yellow coating after this, then the green coating. I'm not going to do that because it's a bit of a waste of paint, but if you wanted to go down that path, that is certainly an option for you, and a very important option to consider, because they were painted dark yellow. Now, the first batch of 1943 order came in groups of 10. On the first group on the 6th of July 43, the second group on the 8th of August, and the next group on the 12th of September. Now, the options given to you in the Tamiya kit are all first batch options, even though when you look in the instructions it says early type and late type on the opposite page. That late type is not meant to mean late production type, I don't think. Late type being some adjustments that the Finns themselves did to the vehicle later on, as opposed to the late type German vehicle that arrived with the Sauerkraut mantlet and some other steel road wheels and steel return wheels and some different things, and Zimmerit on there, etc, etc. So take it in the context, when it talks about early and late type, take it in the context of what the Finnish did to it, adding concrete, adding logs prior to battle in mid-44. Okay, very, very important issue, because it had me confused for a little while until I was doing some research. But the 43 batch of 30 were a G-type early. Not the initial batch, not the initial model, but the early model. And how can we tell? For those that may not be aware, it had this square mantlet, it had rubber return wheels, which the next batch of 29 didn't. It had rubber road wheels. The drive sprocket had the hub as opposed to the bolts that came later. You'll see on the G model, if you go into my other G model that I made, you'll see bolts on the return wheels. The loader's shield for the machine gun, this piece here. On the later model it was the remote weapon station, which was a curved shield. The loader's hatch here opens front to back, so half front, half back, whereas on the later model it opens to the sides. On the periscope ring in the commander's cupola, you have rotating periscope, whereas on the later one it wasn't. And on the early models you had this bolt-on armour at the front. You can see the big bolt-on armour, and with the shield. But this bolt-on armour didn't come on the later versions because of the Zimmerit. A couple of other sort of minor features on the rear and things, but really you're talking about the early G model, whereas the second, as I said, the second batch of 29 came with the model virtually that you would see in my previous Stug that I made, with the Sauerkraut mantlet, with the waffle Zimmerit, with steel wheels, and some just other minor changes like that. Okay, so very, very important. That's where I think the instructions can be misleading. And of course this leads us down the track, of course, of identifying a vehicle. If you are determined to build a vehicle that has fought, what you're looking for in photographs on the internet or wherever you're researching is you need to find a vehicle essentially with what I've just described. If you've come with the Salkoff mantlet, they didn't see any action. Okay, so now that we've covered that, we come back to the issue of this Miyata version with the logs. I couldn't find any photograph of that version at all, and the vehicle certainly existed, but I couldn't find a picture of it, so I'm not sure exactly if it really did come with logs or really did have concrete on its casement. I assume it did, but it may not have. But you may come across this photo on the internet, and I'll have a blow up on the video there. Of note, this is an early version. It has got the concrete casement, has got the logs. It's got some front track protection, which they also did. And so it is clearly an early version. But the trouble is, on the photo you can't see the number, the tank number. However, what the photo does tell us, if you look close, is it's got 11 kill markings on the barrel. You may not see that on there, but the one on your screen, you may see that. It's got 11 kill markings. There's only one vehicle that the Finnish had, Stug 3, that did 11 kills. And that was 531-10, so 10. And its nickname was Booby, B-U-B-I. And you'll see eventually, when I throw it up, I found a photo of it after the war being refurbished without the concrete and without the logs, but you can see the name on it, so you can copy that. You'll have to free paint it on. So you'd have to make that vehicle existed, we know that. Here's a photo of it in some kind of tank park, probably at the end of the war, I would suggest. It's got its towing arms on, and you could use that to model the vehicle. You'd have to change numbers though. You'd have to do a bit of cutting with your decals to get 531-10, and you'd have to hand paint Booby or Burby, however you want to pronounce it, on the driver's visor. And you would have to play around with the decals in the kit with the kills. If you join them together, it'll make 11, so you can actually make the 11 kill markings. So at the end of it, you would actually have a real tank that you would have photographic evidence of in the war. Okay, and you'll find some of those photos either doing a search of this. If you just type in Finnish Stugs, Stug 3s, that'll come up somewhere. And if you check up on that website that I put in my links, you'll find some more details in there. So there's that piece of information. Now I've gone through the 1944 batches. The 1944 batch of 29 were late to middle, early to late, and as I said, they had Salkoff mantlets, except for the Miag vehicles, which I think there was only a couple. But again, they had steel return rollers, the bolts and the drive sprockets. The hatches opened differently, and it had Zimmerit. The Mia version had tile pattern Zimmerit, and if you come across the waffle one, which is the Alket vehicle. Bearing in mind too that the machine gun used was the Russian DT machine gun, which replaced the MG34. Heavy Russian influence in the Finnish vehicles, and I think when we come to look at colours, that's going to influence you, because the base colour of this vehicle is effectively a Russian green, or close to a Russian green. So if you sort of paint it, go along those sort of deep colours. Tamiya say NATO green. At this stage, I plan to use a matte 149 from Humbrol, a dark green. I've got a couple of Model Master Russian greens. That could be an option if I don't like this one, so I'll apply it. But really, the other greens are a little too light. I was considering 252, which I think is potentially a little too light once you look at the restored tanks in Finland, a different colour. So a couple of options there, but pretty much the base colour is going to be green for the vehicle. And then over the top of that, you'll have, as what's sort of indicated on this sheet here, you're going to have a camouflage pattern. Bearing in mind that camouflage pattern for the Finn tanks were hand painted on, and they were hard edged, so don't use a spray gun and have a soft edge. You need to use a hard edge either through masking or potentially painting the outline with a brush and then trying to fill it with your airbrush, or continue to hand paint it. So there's some options there for you depending on how they turn out. I'm going to do it probably hand painted and see how it sort of turns out, but I might have to do a couple of coats of hand paint to get it right. It's not so much of a big issue having brush marks, but putting it into the context of scale, you've got to remember at 1/35 scale, the paintbrushes that they would have used, the brush marks would have been quite small and probably negligible. So you don't want big brush marks and then sort of think to yourself, well, that's how it would have looked, because it would have been out of scale. So you need to sort of think about that when you go through doing the colours. So it's a fairly much a grey colour and a sort of chocolatey brown sort of colour. It's probably a little bit darker than slightly different variation to the German chocolate brown that they use. So a little bit darker. So we might have to sort of play around with those colours a little bit, or just use some filters to sort of change the depth of the colour a little bit. So that's pretty much where we're at the moment with the instruction wise. You have got some flexibility in the decals to make other versions if you're not too worried about doing one that's a real vehicle. Certainly the ones that they have in the instructions, being Miata, the Lee, or the Mary, are all real vehicles. So you can certainly do those options. You can either do them with the casement and the logs or without. They certainly all exist today in the museums in Finland without the casement and the logs, but remember, after the war they're all stripped of that, so you don't really know which ones had it or didn't unless you find a photo. So that's pretty much where we're at the moment. The next stage for this paint job is to do some, I'm not going to do the dark yellow. I don't want to waste my paint on that. I'll use other techniques if I want to show yellow in the chipping. But the next phase is to place some black shading on this. I'm not going to do the whole vehicle in black. I'll do some black shading in some key areas, and then I'll start to work on, then I'll do a coat of green, and then I will look at the cam and come back and do the cam from there. So that's... Hey, welcome back to PanzerGarage. I wasn't going to do a video at the moment, but I thought I'd just give you an update. So the base colour of the camouflage, green in this case, I've been using Humbrol matte 149. Now, after its application, I've had a few problems with some Humbrol paints, matte 33 black, and now to a degree this. It's quite grainy. And you probably can't really see it. It's a little bit splotchy, but it's almost got like a little white tinge on it. Maybe because of the carrier. but it seems as if the particle sizes within the matte are quite big. It is quite dull, but the colouring of it isn't really consistent. Not a big issue. I've tossed up whether to change paints and go to my Model Master Russian colour, but I've gone back and had another look at the colouring, and the colouring is actually correct. It's just the sheen makes it a bit funny. So I think what I might do, if this happens to you, a lot of it's got to do with light reflection. The particles are big. In terms of the matte paint, the valleys within the paint itself are quite low, and it doesn't reflect light very well, hence why it's matte. So what I might do is continue to paint the Camouflage, the other two colours on, the chocolate brown and the grey, and then I might give it a coat of gloss. I've got to do that anyway in terms of putting the decals on, but the gloss might just give back a bit of an even surface, an even shine. But what it will do is it will actually lift the deepness of the colour as well. So I'm hoping it'll fix the problem up. If it doesn't, I'm in a bit of trouble. But it might be just a way of being able to fix up the lack of depth in the colour, and it's just far too matte, and you know, like some little white pieces that have come through. So we'll keep an eye on that for the next one, but by the time you add in the brown, which is roughly going to be half the vehicle, and then 20% on top of that, the grey, the gloss should fix it. So from here, once the cam goes on, do the gloss, do the decals, and then I'll spray another coat or two of matte clear to bring it back to a matte, but it should be more of a satin type colour, I'm hoping, or sheen I should say, I'm hoping on the end. So overall, not really happy with this version of the Humbrol paint. It's just not consistent. Generally I like using their paint a great deal, but this one I haven't really enjoyed. So I thought I'd just give you that as an update, just as an issue that we're looking at fixing, because you may come across the same problem. But that's the way you could do it, is just by using some gloss to give it some extra depth, get light reflection going a little bit better. It'll give it a more of a different sheen when you end up putting another matte clear coat on top of the gloss. Alrighty, I'll see you for the next phase. Okay, so welcome back to PanzerGarage. Here we have a completed vehicle minus the weathering and washers, the Tamiya Finnish Stug 3G. Last video we talked about the paint issue, with the green being a little bit mottled, containing a little bit of white. The matte I'm not being really happy about. My little trick with the gloss worked. It seems to have evened out the colour due to, essentially, without getting too involved in it, it helps better with the consistent light reflection. So I did one coat of the entire model, minus the wood. I didn't have the wood on at that stage, of gloss. Whilst I had the gloss on, I then put on the decals, and then I did 2 coats of matte. So what it's done is it's evened out the Humbrol green 149 magnificently. Actually, it's turned out exceptionally well, and I probably couldn't ask for a closer colour to what I think is the original sort of Finnish colours. It's a little bit deeper than the slightly different green to Russian armour green, and the brown, which is German 160, German red, Humbrol 160, sorry, German red, has come up quite well, considering that that's hand painted on as per how it was originally done. And also the grey, which is Model Master Russian topside grey. It's the closest grey I could find in my kit to get it, which I think actually has turned out quite well. Maybe it's the original seems to be slightly tanner, but to be honest, it's pretty close from what I can see without sort of going to see a real Finnish tank restored. So it's come up quite well, and you can kind of tell that it's been a little bit, it's probably been brushed on, which is actually what I want. Like, I think if we worry about getting a perfect spray, if we sprayed it on and we worried about it then I think we're defeating the purpose of actually having a model done as close to how it would have originally been done. So again, it is different to what I would have done airbrushing, but there's a reason for it, and that reason, of course, is that historically the grey and the brown was hand painted on by the crew or the factory. I'm not sure which one. So look, I'm happy with the camouflage pattern and the way it turned out, particularly the green. I couldn't have asked for a better result with the green. So that sort of wraps up the camouflage side of things. The decals, remember I spoke about, I'm looking at vehicle number 10 because I found that historical vehicle. So again, I spliced the details and we ended up with 10 here, and I had to hand paint Booby on, which is B-U-B-I with a small b, and I've got it, and you'll see a photo of that come up, of the original. Or the restored vehicle, I should say, minus the concrete. So that, I'm quite happy with the way it turned out. I had to splice the lines, the kill marks, but I was softening, be very careful, I was softening the, as you do with the decals, you put a decal softener on. And this line here kind of went all funny on me, so I had to patch it up a little bit with white paint when I was doing the booby. So, but you know, I'm not too worried about that. A lot of that stuff you can hide when you start to weather it. It kind of ends up fading and blending in from that. So the wood I'm exceptionally happy about. Wood is actually, wooden logs are quite difficult to do if they're from plastic. It's always a pain to get the colours right, particularly when you're looking at a Scandinavian type pine, because the pine, the outer shell isn't really dark, and the wood interior, if you've ever bought Scandinavian furniture from IKEA or anything like that, the wood is actually quite yellow on the inside. It's quite light, the pine is. So trying to match that was a bit painful, and if I took this off, there's experimentation wise, there's quite a little bit of experimentation on the other side of these wood. So what I ended up doing was I undercoated the wood in Tamiya oxide red, like I did for the whole tank anyway, and that actually didn't turn out to be quite bad. Actually, it kind of helped because it took away that underlying plastic problem that you kind of have. And then the undercoat, which I did over the whole lot, mainly for the ends, is actually Model Master Africa Brown 1942, and I let that set and dry, and then the ends I added on Humbrol ochre, just in little places, just to break up the wood, like the wood grain as you would see in any type of pine furniture. You get multicolours, so I did a little bit of that thin down, and then I sort of blended it in, and then I used oils of burnt umber, and again did the same sort of thing, just to sort of mix up the colours and make it a little bit more inconsistent and things like that. So the sides I ended up predominantly using dark earth dry blotched on, so just
dark earth, and then dry the brush, and then dry brushed on, as most of you guys will already know. And then I let that set. Did another lot in dark earth again, just to make the brown heavier and lighter in different areas. And then I used some raw sienna in oils thinned, and then put that on again just to give it another little layered effect of colour. And then a tiny bit, once that dried, a tiny bit of burnt umber thinned again in certain areas as well, just to sort of break up the colour. So I'm quite happy with actually how the wood turned out, to be honest. A little bit more of it on the other sides I'll fix up when we do the weathering. So overall, the actual painting of the kit in clean form I'm quite happy with, and really once it settles down with the weathering and etc. will come out quite well, I think. The machine gun hatch, the Russian DT, technically speaking, the way I have it there is not correct. Okay, these hatches here move forward and backwards when they open, and to have that shield standing up, you actually need this front hatch forward, which actually uses as a bit of a pivot point for the shield to stand up. So in reality, this shield would not be able to stand up without that hatch open. Now, I didn't want to go back and open the hatch, mainly because there's no interior to this tank and I don't have another figure to hide it, so you'd look straight into the interior of the tank and see nothing. So I kept it closed. I had a look at this modelled flat and it didn't look too bad, but I actually wanted the Russian DT weapon on there just to be a bit different to the German versions, which would have had a German machine gun on there. So I decided to just use a little bit of liberty and have that up, and it's kind of balanced. The gun's sort of balanced, and in my theory has sort of kept it up. In reality, that's not going to happen. But in terms of modelling license, yes. So for the people out there that are watching this that know what I'm talking about and know that it's not correct, I'm sorry. But in terms of wanting, I actually just wanted it to stand up and have the shield, the gun in the shield, to sort of make it work. So there's a little bit of liberty there, which is okay. But if you want to model it correctly, that would actually be folded, flattened down, and the gun would be stowed inside. The gun would only come out when the crew member comes out. Alright, so that ties up that issue there. Okay, so the tank tracks here, again, just normal sort of extra tracking here. And going back to our original photo that I showed you earlier, there's more track links. It's not one long track link. Now when you're in the kit, when you build the kit in the kit form, you get one long track link in one piece. But if you look closely here, it's split in half, and half the tracks are facing that way, and the other group of tracks are facing that way. Okay, so it is slightly different, and this side has got one more track link than that side, just as per the photo. So I added that track link on by just using some spare frill model tracks that I had lying about. So there, and then you've got the tow cable arms here, which again are from the original photo as well. So I've added those on there, which are actually quite painful, because if you use the ones in the Tamiya kit, they actually won't work because the the arms are too thick for the holes. So I had to use some ones out of an old Dragon kit that I had and put on there. Alright, so it turned out well there. Now, the track on the side of the vehicle, I could have used free model tracks, because I did have some, but I actually decided to try and experiment with the vinyl tracks. They're not usual old sort of Tamiya vinyl tracks. They went together very well. You'd be struggling to pick up the join mark anywhere. on these tracks. So they are vinyl, and then what I did was paint them up and put them on. Interestingly, you'll notice the solid guide horns. For the period that they're in, they're actually correct. So if you're getting through models, try the solid guide horns instead of the heavy guide horns that are hollow. Alright, so it's actually correct in this case. Now, you'll see kind of a slight wave here in the track. So that was done by using cotton buds and shoving them into these areas, and then using super glue underneath to make it hold the shape. Now the tracks on these things seem to be quite tight anyway, so it didn't need to have massive sag. I know you'll see some vehicles with massive sag, and some of the vehicles I've done in the past have had a lot bigger sag than this. But in this case, most of the photos I've seen, they seem to be reasonably tight, so I've sort of kept it the same sort of way. Also, I wouldn't have been able to get much more of a sag out of these unless I went to my own tracks. But look, I've been quite happy with how this turned out. It's saved me a lot of time putting through models together, tracks together. And, you know, whilst it doesn't have the weight, I think, you know, in the comments if you disagree, feel free to put it down. But I think in terms of its looks, it looked okay. It's had multiple coats of different colour paint, undercoating, black, Humbrol track colour, gunmetal colour, and I know they look silver, and they probably can't, they look sort of metal. I know in the video they probably just look like they're the original, but they're actually painted on because they were black at one stage. So again, the guide horns will kind of clear up any dust, dirt, rust, anything like that, just over time with them being used. And remember too that these tanks, when they got them, actually aren't that old. They're fairly new by the time that the period of time we're talking about. So again, when it comes to chipping and all that sort of stuff, you don't want too much in there. Whilst on the chipping, I will add, and you'll see in the part 2 of the video, is that don't forget underneath this coat of paint, even under the green, it would have been dark yellow. So you're going to have to factor that in as well. The last thing I want to talk about is the figure. Now, the figure faces admittedly aren't my strong point. Okay, but I just want to talk about the colouring. Alright, you'll notice that it's black. For those that have done any research, there's actually not a lot of information on Finnish uniforms. However, there is a couple of really good sites, and I'll place that link in the text of underneath the YouTube video. Different uniforms were used throughout the Finnish period, but this particular Tamiya uniform that's moulded on for this Finnish one is a 1936 or M36 tunic, based on the German M36 tunic, and you can tell because of the 2 pockets down here. If it's an M34 tunic, it won't have the 2 pockets. Alright, so basically you have to look at Finnish M36 uniforms if you're going to paint it. Alright, so that's sort of the first stage. Second stage is Finnish uniforms are actually grey. Okay, very similar colour to the hat, even a little bit lighter. Okay. So again, that's very easy to research. Kind of a greyish, a bit probably around the same type of grey as the grey on the tank actually, of the uniform. However, I've taken some liberties here. It's very rare, but I found some photos, and you'll see one pop up, of Stug drivers in an M36 leather jacket from the Germans. Okay, allegedly some were acquired. Not many, but they're quite rare, and you'll see a photo of one that I've just popped up, and you'll see another photo of another one pop up on a display. So given that this tank here, Booby, is quite famous and had 11 kills, the photo that I popped up, it was tank number 8 that had the guy in the leather jacket. I've taken a liberty in saying that maybe the guy from number 10 probably acquired. a leather jacket and pants. Okay, so I've taken that liberty there. It's also an officer. Why? Because he's wearing a Sam Brown, and only officers wore Sam Browns. Okay, so again, another important factor when you're painting this, that this guy's an officer. Now, what I couldn't find is insignia, a lot of insignia issues. Now, Finnish uniforms, they generally had insignias on the collar and the cuff, but on the leather jackets they didn't, which actually suits me well because I don't have any decals of Finnish ranks to put on, and they're too small for me to paint really. So the leather jacket quite well works for me because it hides the cuff and the collar patches of rank, and they didn't wear it on the leather jackets from the photos that I've seen. So it actually works out quite well, and they didn't have shoulder insignia as far as I can tell. But what I do know is that on the leather jackets that I have seen, they didn't wear it. So I would assume that these officers, because they're in a tank crew and all that sort of stuff, people just assumed who they were anyway and what rank they held anyway, which is very similar to how we operate today with rank as well. So not a big issue, but I'm not too wrapped around the issue I'm not too wrapped around the problem of not having insignia, because I think by making this a leather jacket, I've kind of explained my way out of this. And that may be a way that you could do that as well. However, I've left the Finnish cap there, which came in a variety of colours. So you can do a greyish sort of colour, or you can do more of a blue, grey, field grey, Germany colour type colour. And it would have had the roundel, which is white, and sort of a sky blue on top as well. Okay, so that kind of explains why the figure is in black, if you're questioning that, if you've done your own research. So the next stage of this now is to weather it, and I'm going to do another video, a separate video of that in part 2, which will come up at some stage. I haven't decided yet whether to make a diorama for it. I'd like to, if I can do it. It just comes down to time, but it'll definitely get weathered. I need to sort of fix up a couple of issues here and weather the cables. Also, by the way, the cables in the Tamiya one, they use the string, as you probably come across before. I found them very difficult to do in this case because you'd have to layer out the string, somehow harden the string, which I usually do with super glue. But to mould it around there and then to paint it, pull it off and paint it is an absolute pain. So what I ended up doing is I had a couple of Eureka cables, and I ended up using wire. You know, Eureka branded wire for that, and then I moulded them. But I painted them up in gunmetal, but I need to sort of play around with the colours and probably change that back to green, because the arms would have been the same colour as the tank, and then sort of muck around with the cabling. So I'll do all that as well. Alright, so I'll see you back for the next stage. Have a good one.